So you and the team out with some research, Robin. It says the summer barbecue for 10 people will cost about $161. That's for a pretty big menu. It's for food, it's for beverages, yet that's still up 2.4% from last year. What are the other distinctions that you notice with this year versus last year?
Yeah, well, I think you called it right out of the gate. We are seeing meat and proteins really rise year over year, specifically when we talk about ground beef, which is up about 14%. As you noted, we are at record low supplies dating back almost 75 years. So that's really causing some stress with the budget. We do see a little bit of relief and better news with chicken breasts. It's a good lean protein that's up about 3%. Pork ribs are another option, again, up about 3%, but really good and convenient when feeding a crowd.
Well, is there any area where we've seen that shoppers are getting some relief? We've been seeing prices going up nonstop, as we clearly are seeing through some of your reports.
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. Two areas that I can highlight would be desserts. Sugar prices have stabilized. So we're seeing cookies, ice cream, both up just only 1% year over year. I'd almost call it flat. Pies, especially, in the bakery area, again, up just about 4%. But I think that lowering of the sugar cost is helping out in the bakery aisles. Another area I'd point out would be fruit. And, the best way that you can find value in fruits is to really purchase whatever is seasonal. So there are some good options there, watermelon being one, it's down about 3%. And then berries are a mixed bag, but you can probably find some value in savings there as well.
Well, your report is called Stay Close, Grill Big. Are families choosing backyard gatherings as opposed to travel at all because of affordability?
We are seeing more people opting to stay closer to home, and with that comes the bigger crowds. You have hopefully some more family around and friends to join you. And that's really kind of what we took into account with our menu and our planning, really thinking about feeding that crowd.
We spoke to Marta Norton over at Empower earlier. I mentioned that the CME Group is launching trading contracts for the beef products that are used in hamburgers and meatballs as prices surge amid a shrinking U.S. cattle herd. As we mentioned, too, at the top of this, there are political implications of that, kind of both ways for the president. One is you want to satisfy the farmers without alienating them by allowing for cheaper imports, but you also want to make sure that the folks who aren't the farmers and are paying for this stuff at the grocery store aren't seeing prices rise too dramatically. Is there relief on the horizon specifically when it comes to beef prices?
In truth, it is going to take some time. Rebuilding the herds is not an overnight process, as you can imagine. It can take 2 to 3 years to get the calves up and ready. So we do expect to see some relief, but not until 2027, perhaps, as the herds start to come back up.
What about the screwworm part of the equation here?
Yeah, so the screwworm is back in the United States. It's really in the southern states. We're keeping an eye on that. At this point, we do not see that is really disrupting beef supply or having any issue on pricing.
Why do you argue in your report that ribs are taking center stage?
Pork prices have been relatively stable, especially relative to, red meat and chicken. And again, it's an option where it can be easy to feed a crowd with some of the different cuts of pork where you can really find some good value.
Well, also, how are you thinking about just not this holiday season, but what this means for grocery prices down the road as we're looking into the second half of the year?
The grocery prices have really followed the food at home information that we're seeing coming out of the BLS. And we see that it's moderating compared to some of the increases that we saw in the past, certainly tracking back to COVID. So there's good news that the increases are not as big as they had been, but still it is costing more. I will say, that when we talk about produce, fruits, vegetables, any commodities like that, it's really a function of supply and demand. The pricing is a function of supply and demand. And so with beef, we see the prices high because the supply is low. I think as we get into the growing seasons and more options are available and hopefully increasing some of the supplies, maybe those prices could moderate a bit.
We're speaking with Robin Wenzel, head of the Wells Fargo Agri-Food Institute. She joins us from Minneapolis this afternoon. One of the conversations that we had over the last couple of months has been the cost of transporting the products that we buy at the grocery store, and specifically when it comes to produce and getting, let's say, some produce from California to the East Coast, maybe not as important this time of the year, but the increase in diesel prices that we saw in the earlier part of this year really affecting those prices. Given that we haven't seen gas prices come down the way we have seen oil prices come down. Is that still a big share of increase in cost when you're at the grocery store?
For the produce and for those transportation, those costs are built in. It can take some time to see that come down in the pricing. Throughout history, we see diesel prices go up and go down. And so it does moderate within the fresh produce. It doesn't always tend to be to as great a degree as we would think. Although of recent, we are seeing some impact, but we do hope that will, again, start to moderate and trend down at some point.
When should that trend back to pre-war levels?
I don't have the answer to that. I would like to have that answer, but I think it is going to take a bit of time, as we can imagine, to kind of work through inventories and have it right size a little bit.
Well, Robin, outside of beef, where else are you really seeing consumers being crunched in this moment? Earlier, we were just talking about buy now, pay later on one of our earlier shows on Bloomberg TV, and how so many consumers are trying to find ways just to finance the essentials. Don't know if we consider 4th of July backyard grilling an essential, if you will, but curious, where else are you really seeing consumers essentially trading down?
With beverages, that's one of the areas. Certainly, we've seen kind of, alcohol beverages flat. They're up about 1% in price, but we are seeing consumers trying to find other options out there. Part of it is consumer taste and preference, people looking for low sugar, low alcohol, no alcohol options, and, switching to the sparkling waters and some of the other beverages. I would also say that, dried goods, those pantry items tend to be effective with cost savings for consumers versus a lot of the fresh produce and proteins.
Are we at this point, Robin, seeing any macroeconomic effects as a result of GLP-1s? There was so much talk a couple of years ago. There were folks out there saying this is going to be a boon for airlines because if everybody weighs less, they're not going to have to spend as much on fuel. Certainly, we've seen some CPG companies change up their formulations and add protein, and we've seen portion size commentary from companies. What are you seeing in your world?
We are seeing a shift in consumers' habits and their purchases at the grocery store. So we do see people trying to lean in on the outer aisle. Again, the fresh produce and protein when they're on GLP-1s, avoiding a lot of the processed foods, the sugary foods. So we see some changes there. Protein and fiber are the two winners from the GLP conversation. That's really where a lot of the consumers and people taking GLP-1s are focused with their nutrition, with their diet, and finding ways to supplement and add that to their menu.
But what types of proteins and what types
lean
of fiber?
Proteins.
Everything?
Yeah, lean. I would say
lean proteins.
Protein.
Okay.
Yeah, lean proteins. So your fish, your chicken, all of those. I'm really trying to pack it in. Also looking at dairy. Dairy's been a great source for protein. We've seen cottage cheese just explode in popularity. A lot of the yogurts. So that's an area in addition to a lot of the protein shakes that we see. And, with fiber, it's getting those fruits and vegetables in there, getting some of the whole grains in there, and then certainly adding to it all with supplements.
Are you seeing at all shoppers maybe going toward canned goods as opposed to maybe fresh produce or fruits? When we think about the produce section, are you seeing people maybe trading down from a brand name to Walmart's Great Value?
People are prioritizing, making their budget stretch, and that is certainly a way to do it. So working with private label, working with more of the dry goods, the canned goods, there's value there. And certainly a lot of the retailers are incentivizing people to shop in that area as well with some of the specials. So it is a constructive way to make your budget stretch further.